The rain in Boston doesn't just wash away the dirt, it seems to soak right into your bones, turning the city into a gray, shivering ghost of itself. That is exactly how I felt standing on the curb outside the massive wrought iron gates of the Sterling estate. My name is Sarah, and for 28 years, I thought I knew what family meant. I thought it meant the Sunday dinners in that house, the smell of my father's pipe tobacco in the library, and the way the floorboards creaked in the hallway. But as I stood there, clutching a garbage bag filled with my clothes, the cold rain mixing with the hot tears on my cheeks, I realized that family is a fragile concept, easily shattered by the weight of a dollar sign. Today was the day my half-brother Marcus finally succeeded in erasing me from the legacy of the only father I ever knew. It had barely been 48 hours since the funeral. The flowers on Dad's grave hadn't even wilted yet, but Marcus had already moved the appraisers in. I remember the moment my life fractured. It was this morning, in the mahogany-paneled study where Dad used to read me bedtime stories. Marcus sat behind the massive oak desk, looking less like a grieving son and more like a CEO closing a hostile takeover. He didn't even offer me a seat. He just slid a single piece of paper across the polished wood. It was an eviction notice. I looked at him, trying to find a trace of the boy I used to play hide-and-seek with, but his eyes were cold, calculating, and empty. He told me that since I was adopted and Dad hadn't updated his will since before I arrived, the estate, the investments, and the house were legally his. He called me a charity case that had overstayed its welcome. He said he had buyers coming for the property next week and that my presence was bringing down the property value. I tried to argue. I tried to tell him about the promises Dad made, about how I had spent the last 5 years nursing Dad through his dementia while Marcus was partying on yachts in Miami. I reminded him that I was the one who knew which medicine Dad needed at 3 a.m. and how to calm him down when he forgot where he was. Marcus just laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. He told me that caretaking was minimum wage work and that I should be grateful he wasn't charging me back rent for the room I slept in. Then he called security. I wasn't even allowed to pack my books or the photo albums. I was given 10 minutes to fill a black plastic bag with essentials and escorted out the front door like a criminal. So there I was, shivering on the sidewalk. I had $80 in my bank account, no job because I had quit to care for Dad full-time, and nowhere to go. The heavy oak door of the mansion slammed shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the quiet, wealthy neighborhood. I started walking toward the subway station, my cheap sneakers squishing in the puddles. The mansions of Beacon Hill loomed over me, their golden windows glowing with warmth that I was now locked out of forever. I felt small. I felt invisible. I felt like the city was a beast ready to swallow me whole. I dragged my bag down the steps into the subway station, seeking shelter from the downpour. The station was humid and smelled of stale coffee and ozone. It was rush hour, and the platform was packed with people rushing home to their families, their eyes glued to their phones, completely ignoring the world around them. I found a spot near a pillar and leaned against the cold tiles, trying to stop my hands from shaking. That's when I saw her. Sitting on a dirty plastic crate near the turnstiles was an elderly woman. She looked like a pile of rags that someone had discarded. She was wearing layers of mismatched, oversized coats that were stained with grime, and a woolen hat pulled low over her eyes. People were stepping over her legs as if she were a piece of trash. Some openly sneered. A businessman in a sharp gray suit accidentally kicked her shin as he rushed past, and didn't even apologize. He just muttered something about the city needing to clean up the mess. The woman didn't shout or beg. She just rubbed her leg with a trembling, arthritic hand and stared at the floor. I don't know what made me stop. Maybe it was because, for the first time in my life, I knew exactly what it felt like to be looked at as if you didn't matter. I knew the sting of being unwanted. I tightened my grip on my garbage bag and walked over to her. As I got closer, I saw that she was shivering violently. Her lips were a pale shade of blue. She was holding a small, battered cardboard sign that simply read, "Hungry," but she wasn't holding it up. It was resting face down on her lap, as if she had given up on asking. "Excuse me, ma'am," I said softly, crouching down so I wouldn't tower over her. She flinched, pulling her coat tighter around herself, expecting to be told to move or to be yelled at. She looked up, and I was struck by her eyes. They weren't cloudy or dull like I expected. They were a piercing, vibrant green, sharp and intelligent, buried in a face mapped with 1,000 wrinkles. She looked at me, really looked at me, scanning my wet hair, my red eyes, and the black garbage bag I was clutching. "I'm not a tourist attraction, girl," she rasped, her voice sounding like dry leaves scraping together. "If you're looking for a photo for your social media to show how charitable you are, find someone else." I blinked, surprised by her sharpness. "No," I said, shaking my head. You looked cold. I don't have much, but I was going to get a coffee to warm up. Would you like one?" She studied me for a long moment, her suspicion hanging in the air between us. Then, slowly, she nodded. "A coffee, black, 2 sugars, if you're buying." I left my bag next to her, a risky move in the city, but I instinctively felt she wasn't the type to steal a bag of used clothes, and ran to the small kiosk at the end of the platform. I bought 2 large coffees and 2 bagels with the last bit of cash in my pocket. When I came back, she was guarding my bag like a hawk, glaring at a teenager who had walked too close to it. I handed her the steaming cup and the bagel. She took it with hands that looked like twisted roots, wrapping her fingers around the warmth. She didn't thank me immediately. She just took a long sip and let out a sigh that seemed to release years of tension. We sat there in silence for a while, 2 castaways on an island of concrete, watching the trains screech into the station and leave again. "Rough day?" she asked suddenly, not looking at me, just tearing off a piece of the bagel. "You could say that," I replied, staring at my own untouched coffee. "My father died, and today, my brother threw me out. I have $80 and a bag of clothes. That's it." The old woman chewed slowly. "Brothers can be snakes. Money turns blood into poison. I've seen it happen more times than I care to count." She turned those sharp green eyes on me again. "You have a kindness in you, Sarah. Most people in your situation would be too consumed by their own misery to notice an old bat freezing near a turnstile. Why did you stop?" I shrugged. "Because I know how it feels to be discarded, to be told you have no value." She chuckled, a low, wheezing sound. "Value is a funny thing. The world thinks it's about the numbers in a bank account or the label on your jacket. But real value? That's about what you do when you think no one is watching." Her name, she told me, was Eleanor. She didn't offer much about her past, and I didn't pry. She just said she had been on the streets for a few years, surviving on the invisible margins of the city. As we talked, the rush-hour crowd began to thin out. I realized I had nowhere to go. I couldn't afford a hotel, and the shelters were likely full by now. "You got a place to sleep tonight, girl?" Eleanor asked, wiping crumbs from her mouth. I shook my head. "I'll figure something out. Maybe ride the train for a few hours." "Don't be stupid," she snapped, though her tone was less harsh now. "You'll get robbed, or worse. I know a place. It's not the Ritz, and it smells like damp cardboard, but it's dry, and the police don't bother us there. It's an old maintenance tunnel under the library." I hesitated. The idea of sleeping in a tunnel terrified me. But looking at the empty station and feeling the damp cold of my clothes, the idea of being alone terrified me more. "Okay," I said. "Lead the way." That night was the longest of my life. The tunnel was exactly as she described, damp, dark, and smelling of rust. But there was a community there, other people who had fallen through the cracks. They greeted Eleanor with respect, moving aside to let her sit on a pile of dry pallets. She motioned for me to sit beside her. I used my garbage bag as a pillow and tried to sleep, listening to the distant rumble of the subway above us. Eleanor stayed awake, keeping watch. At one point, I woke up from a nightmare about Marcus laughing at me, and I felt a rough hand patting my shoulder. "Go back to sleep, Sarah," Eleanor whispered in the dark. "You're safe here. The wolves can't get you down here." Over the next 3 days, I stuck with Eleanor. I learned the rhythm of the streets. I learned which bakeries would give you the day-old bread if you asked politely, and which security guards would let you use the bathroom without causing a scene. It was a brutal, humbling education. But through it all, Eleanor was this strange, stoic anchor. She asked me endless questions about my life, about my father, and specifically about Marcus. She wanted to know everything: the name of his company, the lawyers he used, the specific dates of the estate transfer. I thought she was just making conversation to pass the long, empty hours. I didn't realize she was building a case. On the fourth morning, the sun actually came out. We were sitting on a park bench near the financial district, sharing a sandwich I had bought with my last $5. I was exhausted. My hair was matted, my clothes were wrinkled, and I felt a deep, hollow despair settling in. I had applied for 3 waitress jobs that morning, but without a permanent address or clean clothes for an interview, I was turned away at the door. "I think I need to leave Boston, Eleanor," I said, staring at the skyscrapers where people like Marcus made millions destroying lives. "There's nothing for me here." Eleanor stopped chewing. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and stood up. She straightened her dirty coat with a strange amount of dignity. "You're not going anywhere, Sarah. The game is just starting." I looked at her, confused. "What game?" "Eleanor, I have nothing left." "You have me," she said, a mischievous glint appearing in her eyes. "And you have a date tonight." "A date?" I asked, thinking the heat or hunger was finally making her delirious. "Tonight is the annual Beacon Hill Gala," she said. "It's the biggest social event of the season. Every billionaire, judge, and politician in the city will be there, including your brother. I heard 2 suits talking about it near the coffee shop this morning. Marcus is planning to announce the sale of your father's estate to a foreign developer tonight. He wants to tear down the house, your home, and build luxury condos." My stomach dropped. He couldn't. That house was historic. It was Dad's life's work. He can't tear it down, I whispered. "He can, and he will, unless we stop him," Eleanor said firmly. "Stop him? Eleanor, look at us." I gestured to my dirty jeans and her layers of rags. "We can't even get into the lobby of that hotel, let alone the ballroom. Security would throw us out before we got within 50 feet of the door." Eleanor smiled, and for the first time, I saw something behind that smile that sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't the smile of a homeless woman. It was the smile of a predator who had just spotted prey. "You let me worry about getting in. You just worry about what you're going to say when you face him." "But I don't understand," I stammered. "Who are you, really?" Eleanor reached into the deep pocket of her grimy coat. She pulled out a small, velvet pouch that looked ancient. She opened it and tipped it into her palm. A ring tumbled out. It wasn't just a ring. It was a massive, flawless emerald surrounded by diamonds, glittering so violently in the sunlight that it almost hurt to look at. It looked like it was worth more than the entire city block we were sitting on. "I'm someone who remembers debts, Sarah," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "And I'm someone who knows that sometimes the most powerful people in the city are the ones nobody bothers to look at. Now come on, we have a lot of work to do. We need to get you a dress." I stared at the ring, then at her. "Where did you get that?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Let's just say I didn't always sleep in tunnels," she winked, "and I still have a few friends in high places who owe me favors. Big favors." She led me away from the park, not toward the shelters or the soup kitchens, but straight toward the heart of the high-end fashion district on Newbury Street. I felt absurd walking behind her. People stared, moving out of our way with looks of disgust. But Eleanor walked with her head held high, clutching that dirty coat like it was a royal robe. We stopped in front of a boutique that didn't even have price tags in the window, the kind of place where you had to make an appointment just to breathe the air. Eleanor marched right up to the glass door and buzzed the intercom. A security guard appeared, looking down his nose at us through the glass. He shooed us away with his hand, mouthing the words, "Go away." Eleanor didn't flinch. She pulled the emerald ring out of her pocket and pressed it against the glass. The guard paused. He squinted. Then his eyes went wide. He disappeared for a second, and a moment later, an elegant woman in a black dress came running to the door. She unlocked it and threw it open, ignoring the smell of the street that wafted in with us. "Madame Eleanor?" the woman gasped, looking at the homeless woman with absolute awe. "Is it really you? We heard rumors. We thought you were... dead?" Eleanor finished the sentence with a dry cackle. "Not yet, darling. I've just been on a sabbatical, observing the human condition. Now stop gawking. My friend here needs a gown. Something that says, 'I'm here to take back my kingdom.' And we need it fitted, steamed, and ready in 2 hours. Can you handle that?" The woman nodded frantically. "Of course, madame. Anything for you." I stood there, stunned into silence, as the staff of the most exclusive boutique in Boston began running around to serve a woman who, 5 minutes ago, had been looked at like garbage. Eleanor turned to me, her green eyes blazing. "Go get cleaned up, Sarah. Tonight, we aren't just crashing a party. We're going to burn your brother's little empire to the ground." The shower in the private suite at the back of the boutique was unlike anything I had ever experienced, even living in my father's home. It was a cavern of white marble and gold fixtures, with water pressure that felt like a torrential downpour designed to scrub away sins. I stood there for what felt like an hour, watching the gray, gritty water swirl down the drain. It wasn't just the dirt of the subway tunnels leaving me. It was the feeling of helplessness, the scent of fear, and the residue of the person Marcus thought he had destroyed. When I finally turned off the tap and wrapped myself in a plush robe that felt softer than a cloud, I looked in the fogged-up mirror. The woman staring back at me was still pale, her eyes still haunted by the last few days, but the trembling had stopped. The fear was hardening into something cold and sharp, like the edge of a diamond. When I stepped back into the fitting room, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. The boutique staff moved with the silent, terrified efficiency of a pit crew working for a dictator. Eleanor was sitting in a velvet armchair, sipping a glass of champagne. But this wasn't the Eleanor I knew. Gone was the stained coat, the woolen hat, and the fingerless gloves. In their place, she wore a silk dressing gown, her silver hair washed and brushed into a sleek, severe bob that framed her face like a helmet. Her skin, though lined with age, glowed with vitality, and those green eyes were sharper than ever. She didn't look like a homeless woman anymore. She looked like an empress in exile, plotting her return to the throne. "You scrub up well, kid," she said, looking me over with a critical eye. "But now comes the armor." The owner of the shop, a woman named Julianne, who looked like she was about to faint from nervous energy, wheeled out a rack of gowns. There were silks, satins, and velvets in every color imaginable, but Eleanor waved her hand dismissively at the pastels and the florals. "No," she said, her voice cutting through the room. "We don't want her to look pretty. Pretty is for debutantes and trophies. We want her to look dangerous. Bring me the crimson silk from the back vault, the one you've been too afraid to put in the window." Julianne's eyes widened. "Madame, that dress, it's very aggressive." "Do I look like I'm in the mood for subtle?" Eleanor raised an eyebrow. Julianne hurried away and returned moments later carrying a garment bag with both hands. When she unzipped it, the air in the room seemed to change. The dress was a masterpiece of blood-red silk, cut with a neckline that was daring but regal, and a back that plunged low. It was structured to look like a second skin, flowing into a train that moved like liquid fire. When I stepped into it, the fabric felt cool and heavy against my skin. It fit as if it had been sewn for me in another life. I stepped onto the podium, and for the first time in days, I didn't see Sarah the victim. I saw Sarah, the survivor. Eleanor stood up and walked around me, nodding slowly. "Good. Now, lift your chin. Higher. When you walk into that room tonight, you aren't walking in to ask for permission. You are walking in to remind them that you exist. Marcus thinks he buried you. Tonight, you show him that he buried a seed, not a corpse." While the makeup artist went to work on me, painting my lips the same shade as the dress and sweeping my hair up into an elegant architectural chignon, Eleanor went to dress herself. When she emerged, I nearly dropped my glass of water. She was wearing a tuxedo, a woman's tuxedo, tailored to absolute perfection in midnight blue velvet. She wore the emerald ring on her right hand and carried a cane topped with a silver wolf's head. She looked eccentric, powerful, and utterly terrifying. "The car is waiting," Eleanor announced, checking a vintage pocket watch. "And don't worry about the bill. Julianne knows I'm good for it." We walked out of the boutique, not through the front door, but through a private exit where a sleek black limousine was idling in the alleyway. The driver, a mountain of a man with a scar running down his cheek, opened the door for Eleanor with a bow that suggested deep reverence. As the car pulled away and merged into the Boston traffic, the silence between us felt heavy with unasked questions. "Eleanor," I said finally, watching the city lights blur past the tinted windows. "Who are you? Really? You know boutique owners, you have drivers, you have diamonds in your pocket. Why were you sleeping in a tunnel?" Eleanor stared out the window, her expression unreadable. "Sometimes, Sarah, you have to step out of the castle to see who the rats really are." She turned to me, her face shadowed. "Decades ago, I was very much like your father. I built an empire. I had money, influence, power. But I was surrounded by vultures, people who smiled to my face and sharpened their knives when I turned my back. My own children. Well, let's just say Marcus isn't unique in his greed. I realized I didn't know who was loyal and who was just waiting for me to die. So I vanished. I let them think I was gone. I walked away to see what they would do with the legacy I left them." "And what did they do?" I asked, dreading the answer. "They destroyed it," she whispered, a flash of pain crossing her eyes. "They tore it apart in a frenzy of greed. I learned the hard way that money doesn't build character, it reveals it. I've been watching the city ever since, looking for people who still have a soul, people like you. That's why I'm helping you, Sarah, because I couldn't save my own legacy, but I'll be damned if I let a little weasel like Marcus destroy yours." The car slowed as we approached the Copley Plaza Hotel. The scene outside was chaotic. A red carpet had been rolled out under the massive awning, flanked by velvet ropes holding back a crowd of onlookers and paparazzi. Flashbulbs were popping like fireworks, illuminating the faces of Boston's elite as they stepped out of their town cars. I saw senators, tech billionaires, and socialites, the very people Marcus was trying to impress. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I felt a wave of nausea. I wasn't one of them. I was a girl who had spent the last 3 nights sleeping on a pallet in a tunnel. "I can't do this," I panicked, my hand gripping the leather seat. "Marcus will have me thrown out. He'll call the police. Everyone will stare." "Let them stare," Eleanor said, grabbing my hand with a grip that was shockingly strong. "Listen to me. Fear is a choice. Marcus is banking on your fear. He's banking on you being the quiet, obedient little sister who disappears when she's told. You are going to break that expectation. You are going to walk in there, and you are going to hold your head so high that they'll wonder if you own the building." The driver opened the door. The noise of the crowd rushed in, the shouting of photographers, the murmur of excitement. Eleanor stepped out first. The cameras flashed, blindingly bright. I heard a few whispers ripple through the press line. "Who is that? Is that a man or a woman? Look at that cane." Then, Eleanor turned and held out her hand for me. I took a deep breath, inhaling the smell of exhaust and expensive perfume, and stepped out. The red dress caught the light, blazing against the gray pavement. As I stood up to my full height, a strange hush fell over the immediate area. The photographers paused, unsure of who I was, but sensing that they should be taking pictures. I wasn't a celebrity, but the dress, the makeup, and the sheer intensity of my expression made me look like someone they should know. I locked my arm through Eleanor's, and we began to walk. The red carpet felt miles long. Every click of my heels sounded like a countdown. We reached the entrance, where a team of security guards with headsets were checking invitations. This was the moment of truth. We didn't have tickets. We didn't have invitations. One of the guards, a man with a thick neck and a clipboard, stepped in front of us. "Ma'am, I need to see your invitation," he droned, looking bored. Eleanor didn't even slow down. She stopped inches from his face, leaned in, and whispered something I couldn't hear. She slipped something into his hand, not money, but a small, heavy card with a gold crest. The guard looked at the card, and all the color drained from his face. He looked at Eleanor, then at the card, then back at Eleanor with wide, terrified eyes. I didn't realize. "I'm so sorry, madame," he stammered, stepping aside so quickly he almost tripped over the velvet rope. "Please, go right in. The VIP entrance is clear." I looked at Eleanor as we breezed past him. "What did you show him?" "My calling card," she said simply. "Old power has a long memory, Sarah. Now keep your eyes open. We need to find the snake." The ballroom was a sea of gold and crystal. Chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling, casting a warm, flattering light over the hundreds of guests. A string quartet was playing Mozart in the corner, but the music was barely audible over the roar of conversation and the clinking of champagne flutes. Waiters in white jackets moved through the crowd like ghosts, offering trays of hors d'oeuvres that cost more than my entire wardrobe. It took me a moment to adjust to the sensory overload. It was beautiful, yes, but it felt suffocating. Every smile looked plastered on. Every laugh sounded rehearsed. This was Marcus's world, a world of surfaces and reflections. "There," Eleanor whispered, pointing with the head of her cane. I followed her gaze. In the center of the room, near the stage, stood Marcus. He was holding a glass of scotch, laughing at something a short, bald man was saying. He looked impeccable in a custom tuxedo, his hair perfectly styled, his posture radiating the easy confidence of a man who thinks he has won. Standing next to him was a woman I recognized, Lydia, his fiancée, a woman who had never spoken a word to me without a sneer. She was hanging on his arm, looking at the room with a bored, predatory expression. Seeing him there, laughing, while I had been starving in a tunnel, ignited a fire in my chest that burned away the last remnants of my fear. He didn't just steal my home, he stole my dignity. He treated me like waste to be flushed away so he could enjoy this moment of glory. "He's about to go on stage," Eleanor noted, watching the room's dynamics. "The lights are dimming. He's going to announce the sale." "We need to get closer," I said, my voice steady. We moved through the crowd. People parted for us, not because they knew us, but because Eleanor walked with the force of a battering ram, and I walked with the focus of an assassin. I heard whispers trailing behind us. "Who is that in the red? Is that Sarah? No, it can't be. Look at the woman with the cane." As we got closer to the stage, the music faded, and a spotlight hit the microphone. The room quieted down. Marcus handed his drink to Lydia and stepped up onto the small platform. He adjusted the microphone, flashing that charming, boyish smile that had fooled so many investors and family friends over the years. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming tonight," Marcus began, his voice booming through the speakers. "It's an emotional night for me. As many of you know, we recently lost my father, the great William Sterling. He was a visionary, a builder, and a pillar of this community." I stood there, stunned into silence, as the staff of the most exclusive boutique in Boston began running around to serve a woman who, 5 minutes ago, had been looked at like garbage. Eleanor turned to me, her green eyes blazing. "Go get cleaned up, Sarah. Tonight, we aren't just crashing a party. We're going to burn your brother's little empire to the ground." I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. He was using Dad's memory, the memory he had disrespected by firing the nurses and ignoring his calls, to sell real estate. "My father always believed in progress," Marcus continued, his voice taking on a fake, somber tone. "He believed that we must move forward, not look back. That is why it is with a heavy heart, but a hopeful spirit, that I announce the next chapter for the Sterling estate. I have decided to sell the family property to the Orion Group, who will transform the land into a world-class luxury residential complex that will revitalize Beacon Hill." Applause broke out. Polite, enthusiastic applause from people who only saw dollar signs. Marcus beamed, soaking it up. "This sale will secure the Sterling legacy for generations to come," he said, raising his hand to quiet the room. "And I know, wherever he is, my father is looking down and smiling." That was it, the line that snapped the tether. "He isn't smiling, Marcus," I shouted. My voice rang out clear and sharp, cutting through the applause like a knife. The room went instantly silent. Heads turned. Hundreds of eyes swiveled toward me. Marcus froze on stage, his hands still raised, his smile faltering. He squinted against the spotlight, trying to find the source of the interruption. "Who said that?" he demanded, his voice losing its smooth polish. I stepped forward, emerging from the shadows into the pool of light near the stage. Eleanor stood right beside me, her hands resting on her cane, looking like a judge presiding over a sentencing. "I did," I said, walking until I was standing right at the base of the stage. Marcus looked down. For a second, he didn't recognize me. He saw the red dress, the diamonds, the hair. Then, he looked into my eyes, and I saw the recognition hit him like a physical blow. His face went pale, then red. "Sarah?" he hissed, leaning away from the microphone but not far enough. "What are you doing here?" "Security!" the crowd murmured. "That's the sister? I thought she looks incredible." I didn't let him recover. I turned to the crowd, addressing the room full of Boston's elite. "My brother is lying to you. He tells you my father wanted this sale? My father loved that house more than anything. He planted the oak trees in the garden with his own hands. He made me promise, on his deathbed, that the house would stay in the family. Marcus isn't selling it for the legacy. He's selling it because he's leveraged himself into debt gambling on tech stocks, and he needs a bailout." A gasp rippled through the room. This was the language these people understood: debt, leverage, instability. The bald man Marcus had been talking to earlier frowned and whispered something to an associate. Marcus's face twisted into a snarl. "Get her out of here. She's mentally unstable. She's been off her medication since Dad died," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She's distraught and making up lies." "I'm not the one lying, Marcus," I said, my voice calm but projecting to the back of the room. "And I'm not the one who forged a signature on a power of attorney document 3 days before Dad died, when he was in a coma." The silence in the room was now absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. The accusation of forgery was a nuclear bomb in a room full of lawyers and contracts. Marcus stepped back, looking like a cornered animal. "You have no proof. You're a jealous adopted charity case who couldn't handle that Daddy didn't leave her a dime." "I may be adopted," I shot back, tears stinging my eyes but not falling. "But I was the one holding his hand when he took his last breath. I was the one who heard his last words. You were in Vegas, Marcus. You didn't even make it back for the moment he passed. So don't you dare talk to me about what Dad wanted." Security guards were rushing toward us now, weaving through the crowd. 2 burly men in black suits were closing in on my left. I braced myself, ready to be dragged out, knowing I had said my piece. But before they could touch me, Eleanor stepped forward. She didn't shout. She just slammed the tip of her cane onto the marble floor with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. "Stay back," she commanded. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried an authority that made the guards skid to a halt. Marcus looked down at Eleanor, sneering. "And who is this? The homeless woman you picked up off the street? Sarah, this is pathetic. Bringing a bag lady to a gala?" Eleanor slowly lifted her head. The light caught the emerald ring on her finger, and then it illuminated her face. She looked directly at the bald man who Marcus had been trying to impress, the head of the Orion Group. "Hello, Jonathan," Eleanor said smoothly. The bald man, the billionaire developer, squinted at her. He took a step closer, pushing past a waiter. He stared at her face, at the silver hair, at the green eyes. Then, his jaw literally dropped. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. "Eleanor?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "Eleanor Vanderhoven?" The name rippled through the room like a shockwave. I heard gasps. I saw older guests clutching their pearls. Even Marcus looked confused, his arrogance flickering. "Vanderhoven?" Marcus stammered. "But she's the founder of the Orion Group. She's been missing for 5 years. She's presumed dead." "I am very much alive, Marcus," Eleanor said, her voice dripping with ice. "And I am the majority shareholder of the company you are trying to sell your father's house to. And let me tell you something, young man. I don't do business with liars. And I certainly don't do business with men who throw their sisters out on the street." The room erupted. It was total chaos. Photographers broke the line, rushing forward to get a shot of the resurrected matriarch. The developer, Jonathan, was rushing over to bow and scrape before Eleanor. Marcus stood alone on the stage, looking small, isolated, and completely destroyed. But the night wasn't over. As the flashbulbs blinded us and the crowd surged forward, I saw a look in Marcus's eyes that terrified me. It wasn't just defeat. It was a pure, unadulterated rage. He reached into his jacket pocket, not for a phone, but for something else. He jumped down from the stage, ignoring the people calling his name, and stormed toward me. "You think you can humiliate me?" he screamed over the noise, his eyes wild. "You think you can just walk back in here and ruin everything I built?" He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bruised skin. The security guards were distracted by Eleanor. No one was looking at us. Marcus pulled me close, his breath smelling of expensive scotch and fear. "I'm going to destroy you, Sarah," he whispered in my ear. "You have no idea what I've done. You have no idea what buried secrets are in that house. And if you think I'm going to let you or some old hag take it from me, you're dead wrong." Suddenly, the lights in the ballroom flickered and went out. The music stopped. A woman screamed. In the pitch blackness, I felt Marcus's grip tighten, and then I felt a cold, hard object press against my ribs. "Get walking," he hissed in the dark. "We're leaving. Now." The darkness in the ballroom wasn't just an absence of light, it was a cloak of chaos. In the seconds after the power cut, the screams of the gala guests created a wall of sound that masked the reality of what was happening to me. Marcus gripped my arm with a force that bruised, dragging me blindly through the crush of bodies. I tried to scream, but the cold, hard muzzle of the pistol pressed firmly against my ribs, shocking me into a terrified silence. He knew the layout of the hotel better than anyone. He navigated us through the panic, shoving aside waiters and guests until we burst through a service door and into the humid, sticky night air of the back alley. "Move," he growled, shoving me toward his silver sports car parked illegally near the loading dock. He fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking with a manic energy. "Get in, or I swear to God, Sarah, I will finish what I started." I slumped into the passenger seat, my heart hammering against my chest like a trapped bird. The beautiful red silk dress that Eleanor had given me, the armor that was supposed to protect me, now felt like a costume in a tragedy. Marcus peeled out of the alley, the tires screeching against the asphalt as he merged recklessly onto the highway, heading away from the city lights and toward the dark, winding roads of the suburbs. "Where are we going?" I whispered, clutching the dashboard as he swerved around a taxi. "Home," Marcus spat, his eyes glued to the road, wide and unblinking. "We're going to find it. Dad's safe. I know it's there." "You were with him every day for 5 years, Sarah. You know where he hid the ledger." "The ledger?" I stared at him, confusion warring with fear. "I don't know what you're talking about. Dad didn't have a ledger. He had dementia, Marcus. He barely knew what day it was." "Don't lie to me!" Marcus screamed, slamming his hand against the steering wheel. "He was lucid enough to hide his offshore accounts. He was lucid enough to write down every illegal transaction, every bribe, every corner I cut to keep the company afloat while he was sick. He told me he documented it all. He called it his insurance policy against my recklessness." The realization hit me harder than the speed of the car. Marcus hadn't just been neglecting Dad, he had been robbing him. The desperation to sell the house wasn't just about debt, it was about destroying the evidence. If the house was demolished by the Orion Group, the hidden ledger, and the proof of Marcus's embezzlement, would be buried under tons of rubble forever. We arrived at the Sterling estate in a blur of gravel and high beams. The house, which had once been a beacon of warmth and safety, now loomed against the stormy sky like a haunted mausoleum. The rain had started again, lashing against the windows as Marcus dragged me out of the car and up the front steps. He kicked the front door open, the lock splintering under the force of his panic. Inside, the house was silent and cold. The furniture was already covered in dust sheets, looking like ghosts in the moonlight filtering through the windows. Marcus pushed me toward the library, the room where Dad had spent his final days. "Find it!" he yelled, shoving me toward the massive oak bookshelves. "Start looking! If we don't find that book before the police or that witch Eleanor gets here, I'm going to jail for the rest of my life. And I promise you, Sarah, I'm not going down alone." I stood there, trembling, looking at the thousands of books lining the walls. I had no idea where a ledger would be. Dad spent his last years reading poetry and looking at old photo albums. He wasn't hiding financial secrets. Or was he? I remembered something, a moment of clarity Dad had about 2 weeks before he passed. He had been agitated, asking for his legacy. I thought he meant me. I thought he meant his children. But maybe he meant the truth. He kept pointing to the fireplace, I whispered, more to myself than to Marcus. What? Marcus snapped, spinning around. The fireplace? He used to stare at the mantel, I said, my voice gaining a fraction of strength. He said the heart of the house was behind the fire. Marcus didn't wait. He rushed to the massive stone fireplace, dropping to his knees. He began frantically feeling around the bricks, his fingernails scraping against the rough mortar. He was muttering to himself, a stream of curses and prayers. It was pathetic and terrifying all at once. A man in a tuxedo, destroying his knees on the hearth of his childhood home, consumed by greed. I backed away slowly, inching toward the heavy oak door of the library. If I could just make it to the hallway, I could run into the woods. I could hide. Going somewhere? Marcus's voice stopped me cold. He stood up, holding a loose brick in one hand and the gun in the other. Behind the brick was a small, dusty metal box. He had found it. His eyes were wild, filled with a sick triumph. "Open it," he commanded, tossing the box onto the desk. "It's a combination lock. What's the code, Sarah? What's the one date the old man never forgot?" I looked at the lock. Dad's memory had faded, but there was one day he talked about until the very end. Not his birthday, not his wedding anniversary. "The day he brought me home," I said softly. "August 12th. Marcus sneered. Of course, the day he got his replacement child. "Enter it." I stepped forward, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the dials. 0812. The lock clicked. The lid popped open. Marcus shoved me aside and grabbed the contents. It wasn't money. It wasn't diamonds. It was a thick, leather-bound notebook and a digital hard drive. He flipped the book open, his eyes scanning the pages. A manic laugh bubbled up from his throat. "This is it," he breathed. "Everything. Every wire transfer. Every shell company. He documented it all. He was going to turn me in. His own son." He looked at me, and the triumph in his eyes curdled into something darker. Pure malice. "Well, Sarah," he said, raising the gun, "I got what I came for. And since you're the only one who knows I was here, I'm afraid this is where our family tree gets a little intense pruning." He clicked the safety off. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the end. I thought of the rain, the tunnel, and Eleanor. I wished I could have thanked her one last time. Suddenly, the room was flooded with blinding white light. The floor-to-ceiling windows of the library shattered inward with a deafening crash as stun grenades detonated on the Persian rug. A wall of sound and light knocked me to the ground. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard shouting, deep, authoritative voices. "Drop the weapon! Federal agents! Drop it now!" Marcus screamed, stumbling back, blinded by the flash. He fired a shot wildly into the ceiling, plaster raining down on us. Before he could aim again, 3 figures in tactical gear vaulted through the broken windows. One of them tackled Marcus with the force of a linebacker, slamming him into the bookshelf. The gun skittered across the floor, sliding to stop right next to my hand. I scrambled back, gasping for air, as the room filled with uniformed officers. And then, walking through the shattered French doors with the calmness of someone entering a tea party, was Eleanor. She stepped over the broken glass, her velvet tuxedo untouched by the chaos. Behind her walked the scarred driver and a man in a trench coat who looked like a high-ranking detective. "Eleanor," I gasped, tears streaming down my face. She didn't look at me yet. She walked straight to where Marcus was pinned to the ground, handcuffed and bleeding from a cut on his forehead. She looked down at him with an expression of absolute disgust. "You really thought you could outrun me, Marcus?" she asked, her voice cutting through the noise. "You forgot one thing. I founded the Orion Group. I built the security systems in half the buildings in this city, including the one you just tried to sell to me. I've been tracking your car since you left the alley." Marcus spat at her boots. Go to hell, you old witch. Eleanor smiled, a cold, sharp smile. I've been there. It's overrated. And where you're going, the accommodations are much smaller. The detective stepped forward and picked up the ledger and the hard drive from the desk. He bagged them as evidence, looking at Marcus with a grim satisfaction. Marcus Sterling, you are under arrest for kidnapping, assault with a deadly weapon, embezzlement, and attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you start using it. As they dragged Marcus out of the room, screaming, kicking, and cursing his father's name, the adrenaline finally left my body. My legs gave out, and I sank onto the floor, surrounded by the ruins of my father's library. Sarah! Eleanor was there in an instant, dropping her cane and kneeling beside me in the glass and dust. Her hands, usually so strong and commanding, were gentle as she brushed the hair from my face. Are you hurt? Did he hurt you? She asked, her green eyes scanning me for injuries. I shook my head, sobbing uncontrollably. He was going to— Shh, it's over, she soothed, pulling me into a hug that smelled of expensive perfume and rain. He can never hurt you again. The wolf has been caged, my dear. We sat there for a long time while the police processed the scene. Finally, Eleanor helped me stand up. We walked out of the broken house and into the driveway. The rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking, revealing a sliver of moon. The flashing blue lights of the police cruisers illuminated the estate, washing away the shadows. We watched as the police car carrying Marcus drove away, disappearing into the night. It was finally over. The fear, the running, the lies, all of it gone. So, Eleanor said, leaning on her cane and looking up at the massive dark house, it seems you have a bit of a cleanup job ahead of you. I looked at the house. My house. It's mine? I asked, the reality not quite sinking in. The will Marcus forged is void, Eleanor explained, and with him going to prison for, well, forever, you are the sole next of kin. The estate, the investments, what's left of the company, it's all yours, Sarah. I looked at the sprawling mansion. It felt too big, too full of ghosts. I don't know if I can live here, Eleanor, not after this. It's too much for one person. Eleanor nodded, understanding. Then don't keep it for yourself. Value isn't about what you own, remember? It's about what you do. 6 months later, the autumn leaves in Boston were a riot of gold and crimson, painting the city in warm hues. I stood on the front steps of the Sterling estate, but it didn't look like a mausoleum anymore. The heavy velvet drapes had been pulled down, letting sunlight flood every room. The silence was gone, replaced by the sound of laughter, footsteps, and life. I adjusted the sign on the front gate, the William Sterling Foundation, a sanctuary for women and families. I hadn't moved back in alone. I had turned the mansion into a transitional home for women who, like me and Eleanor, had found themselves discarded by the world. We offered legal aid, job training, and a warm bed, no questions asked. The library, where I had almost lost my life, was now a classroom where women were learning to code and write resumes. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb. I smiled as Eleanor stepped out. She looked as regal as ever, wearing a trench coat and a silk scarf. She walked up the path, inspecting the flower beds I had replanted. You missed a weed, she noted dryly, pointing her cane at a tiny dandelion. I laughed, hugging her. Good to see you too, Eleanor. Are you coming in for the board meeting? I wouldn't miss it, she said, her eyes twinkling. Besides, I heard you're serving those bagels I like. We walked through the front doors together. Inside, the grand hallway was bustling. A young woman who had arrived just last night, shivering and terrified, was sitting on the stairs holding a cup of hot cocoa, talking to one of our counselors. She looked up as we entered, her eyes wide with uncertainty. I stopped. I remembered that look. I remembered the cold rain and the feeling of being invisible. I excused myself from Eleanor and walked over to the young woman. I sat down on the step beside her, just as Eleanor had sat beside me in the subway station. Hi, I said softly. I'm Sarah. The girl looked at me, clutching her cup. I'm losing everything, she whispered. I don't know how to fix this. I smiled, a genuine, warm smile that came from a place of deep healing. You don't have to fix it all today. You just have to survive today. And you're not alone anymore. As I spoke to her, I looked up and saw Eleanor watching us from the doorway. She wasn't smiling, but she gave me a small, sharp nod of approval. We both knew the truth now. The greatest revenge against those who try to destroy you isn't anger, and it isn't violence. The greatest revenge is to take the stones they threw at you and use them to build a shelter for someone else. My father's legacy wasn't the money in the safe or the bricks of the house. It was this. It was the simple, rebellious act of refusing to let the world turn you cold. And as I sat there listening to the girl's story, I knew that for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bruised skin. The security guards were distracted by Eleanor. No one was looking at us. Marcus pulled me close, his breath smelling of expensive scotch and fear. "I'm going to destroy you, Sarah," he whispered in my ear. "You have no idea what I've done. You have no idea what buried secrets are in that house. And if you think I'm going to let you or some old hag take it from me, you're dead wrong." Suddenly, the lights in the ballroom flickered and went out. The music stopped. A woman screamed. In the pitch blackness, I felt Marcus's grip tighten, and then I felt a cold, hard object press against my ribs. "Get walking," he hissed in the dark. "We're leaving. Now."